The crack of the slap cut through the Sands Hotel restaurant's dining room like a gunshot at point-blank range. Conversation ceased immediately. Cutlery hung suspended in mid-air. At a distant table, with a glass of whiskey he hadn't even touched, Dean Martin witnessed everything. The waiter, too young for that kind of embarrassment, lost his balance and took a few steps back. The tray slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor. The impact echoed through the room. The side of the young man's face was already beginning to redden. Standing in front of him, calmly adjusting his shirt cuffs as if he had merely swatted away an insect, was Tommy the Hammer Morello, a man whose nickname was neither an exaggeration nor folklore. Dean didn't get up immediately. He just watched. Tommy leaned in and murmured something to the boy, low enough for only those at the table to hear. But Dean could read lips, and he understood perfectly. "Put this together and bring me another steak, and this time don't bring me something burnt, you useless thing." The young man knelt down to pick up the shards. His hands trembled so much he could barely hold the pieces of porcelain. A deep cut in his palm caused blood to slowly trickle to the floor, and no one moved to help him. Because in Las Vegas in 1966, helping someone Tommy Morello had decided to humiliate was a fatal mistake. People looked away. They pretended everything was normal. Staying alive was the priority. But Dean Martin was never the type to follow the expected script. To understand what happened next, you need to understand 3 truths about that city that year. First, organized crime didn't just roam Las Vegas, it ruled Las Vegas. Second, Tommy Morello wasn't just an associate, he was a made man, an enforcer whose reputation made adults cross the street. Third, Dean Martin already had a reputation for being the only artist who didn't bow down to anyone. Still, this situation was different. It wasn't a direct confrontation. It wasn't a personal affront. The target was an invisible boy, and precisely for that reason, Dean couldn't remain seated. He stood up. Someone at the table tried to stop him. "Dean, no, it's Morello. You know who he is." "I know," he replied, leaving his napkin on the table. He crossed the room with the same calm step he used when entering the scene. No hurry, no hostility, just presence. Eyes followed him as if something invisible had shifted the axis of the room. The waiter was still on the floor. Tommy, on the other hand, was already laughing with his men, as if nothing had happened. Dean stopped in front of the table. "Tommy," he said in a soft voice, "didn't you like dinner?" Tommy looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Dean Martin, look, the steak was awful, burnt. Someone needs to teach this kid a lesson." "Teach?" Dean repeated, glancing at the injured boy. "Is that what you call it?" The smile remained, but Tommy's eyes grew cold. "Do you have a problem with how I handle things?" "I have a problem with grown men hitting people who can't fight back." The air in the room grew heavy. One of Tommy's men shifted in his chair. He gestured for him to remain seated. "You sing beautifully, Dean, but that doesn't give you permission to meddle where you're not wanted." Dean pulled up a chair and sat down at the table uninvited. A murmur swept through the restaurant. "Or maybe," he replied calmly, "I just don't like seeing bravado used against those who are defenseless." Tommy began listing the waiter's mistakes. Dean listened in silence. When he responded, he was direct. "Or maybe you just needed to feel powerful tonight." Nobody talked to Tommy Morello like that. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "I've made plenty, but this isn't one of them." Then Tommy presented the ultimatum, a public apology or serious consequences. Dean looked at the boy again. He saw a distant reflection of himself, before fame, before he was someone, when he was still pushed around by men who confused fear with respect. Dean stood up. Everyone thought he would leave, but he did the opposite. Dean walked over to the kneeling boy and, with a slow, careful gesture, removed the tray from his trembling hands. The young man seemed not to understand what was happening. His body was rigid, bracing for the worst. "What's your name?" Dean asked, his voice low but firm. "Michael," the boy replied. "Michael Rossini." Dean nodded. "How long have you worked here, Michael?" 6 months, sir." "Do you like the job?" Michael hesitated. He glanced quickly at Tommy's desk before answering. "Yes, I need it." Dean placed the tray on a nearby table and raised his voice just enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Is everyone seeing this? This boy is bleeding because he was picking up broken plates. Plates that fell because someone decided to unleash their anger on someone who couldn't react." The silence was absolute. Tommy slammed his hand on the table. "Dean, you're going too far." "No," Dean replied, turning to him. "You're the one who went too far." Then Dean returned to Tommy's table, picked up the steak with his own hands, and examined it slowly. He turned it, pressed lightly with his fingers, observed the texture. "This steak is exactly as you ordered it," he said calmly. "Well done. No pink, charred on the outside." He put the plate back. "The problem isn't the steak. It's that today you needed to feel bigger than someone." Tommy stood up abruptly. The chair scraped on the floor, producing a harsh sound. He was bigger than Dean, wider, heavier, and used to seeing people recoil at the mere sight of him. "Are you calling me a liar?" he growled. "I'm calling you a coward," Dean replied, without raising his voice. "If you have something to settle, settle it with someone your own size." Tommy's 3 men stood up at the same time. The threat was clear. The entire room held its breath. "Last chance, Martin. Leave now or you'll regret it." Dean smiled, a calm, almost weary smile. "Michael," he said, turning to the young man, "go to the kitchen, clean up that cut, take the rest of the night off, tell the manager I authorize full payment." "But, sir—" "Go." Michael didn't wait for the second order. He ran. That's when Tommy lunged forward. The punch came awkwardly, charged with rage. Dean moved a step to the side, small, precise. The fist missed. Tommy lost his balance and slammed into a nearby table. Glasses shattered. A woman screamed. The thugs advanced, but stopped. Other men had stood up. Customers, gamblers, men who had previously pretended not to see anything. They didn't advance to fight. They simply placed themselves between Dean and Tommy. "That's enough," someone said. "Everyone saw," said another. Tommy realized, for the first time, he had no control of the room. He pointed at Dean, his face red with hatred and shame. "This isn't over." "It's over for today," Dean replied, "and next time, try to respect those who serve you." Tommy left, followed by his men. The hall breathed again. The next morning, Dean was called to the administration office. He expected a reprimand, maybe dismissal. He received something else. Customers had packed the reception area to report what had happened. Ticket sales skyrocketed. The public had chosen a side. The boy not only kept his job, but was promoted. Days later, an envelope arrived in Dean's dressing room. Inside, few words, no apology, only acknowledgement, a silent agreement. Tommy didn't forget, but he respected it. That night, when Dean stepped onto the stage, he was received as something more than an artist. He spoke about respect, about dignity, about invisible people. The audience rose to their feet. Years later, Dean was asked if he was afraid that night. He thought for a moment and replied, I was more afraid of turning my face away. Michael Rossini never forgot. For him, that night wasn't about an artist confronting a mobster. It was about someone looking at a waiter and seeing a human being. Time passed, the powerful names faded, the lights changed, but the story remained. Not as an exaggeration, not as a violent legend, but as a simple reminder. Sometimes all it takes to change something is one person who decides to not remain silent. And that night, at the Sands house, Dean Martin decided to speak. Before I go, I want to ask you something. If this story touched you, if at any point you felt a lump in your throat, if you remembered someone who has been humiliated, ignored, or treated as invisible, then you already understand the purpose of this channel. Here at Iato Riso, we don't just tell stories about fame. We reveal what lies behind the applause, the moments when character is worth more than power, and when a single action changes everything. Subscribe to the channel, not for me, but so that stories like this continue to be told. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters, because there are still many truths that never made it into history books. And if you believe that respect, dignity, and courage still matter, then you're already a part of it. See you in the next video.